This is a pizza, and there's a few ways to cut one: a pizza cutter, a knife, even scissors. But what if you've got more than one pizza? Cutting them one by one would take too long, and it's a waste of time. So today, I'm fixing that problem by making a giant pizza cutter. This thing right here. First things first, I've got to make the giant circle blade. So I drew out a massive circle on a piece of sheet metal and started cutting. I took off big chunks at first, just to get the rough shape. Once I'd removed as much metal as I could, I swapped over to the sanding disc to clean up all the edge and make it perfectly round, or as close to perfectly round as possible. I'm not going to sharpen it yet, that's going to come much later. So I grabbed out a file and smoothened everything out, getting rid of all the sharp scraps or rough spots. Now we've got a nice clean giant circle. I also marked off the very center that I drew a hole in later. But for now, the blade's done and it's time to move on. Next up would be two metal rods. These two metal rods are going to hold the blade to the handle. These need to be identical. So I cut them both to the same size and cleaned up the edges to make them nice and smooth. On one end of the rods, I want to make it round, so I traced a semicircle using the lid of a WD-40 can, which was actually the perfect template, then sanded down the corners until I had that curve I wanted. With my center punch, I then marked off the middle of each rod. There will only be one hole at this end, and this will be the end that holds the blade together. On the other end, I need 3 holes, but for now, I'm only going to mark it on one piece. It's really important that all 3 of these holes line up perfectly. So I drilled them into the first rod before bolting the second bolt to the first one and used those holes to drill a matching set. With that done, there wasn't much more I could do to them here. So it's time to move on to the wooden handle. But just before that, a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. PCBWay is a company that is perfect for your next project, whether it be CNC machining, laser metal cutting, 3D printing, or mold injection. It's as simple as dragging and dropping your file, selecting the material you want it to be made out of, and how many you need. It's really as simple as that. For someone who has a 3D printer at home, it's awesome to be able to order stuff I can't print, such as different metals. I've used their services before to make an Assassin's Creed hidden blade, and this is one of the coolest builds I've ever done, and it's only possible because of them. They have some awesome deals on for October and you don't want to miss out. Oh, and here are the custom pieces I ordered. Their quality is insane. Alright, back to the build. For the handle, there's going to be 3 pieces in total, but for now, I'm only going to work on the centerpiece. This plank of wood is going to be directly connected to the rods that are connected to the blade. So I started off by making 3 dots and drilling the holes straight through the wood. Once they lined up, I traced where the 2 metal rods would sit, one on each side. Getting this perfect is important because I'm going to be cutting a trench into the wood for the rods to fit snugly inside. To do that, I used my router, setting the depth to match the thickness of the metal rods. The goal here is to leave as little wiggle room as possible. Once one side was done, I flipped it over and repeated the same process on the other. Off camera, I tested the fit, and it looked good, I just forgot to show it. Now, if you look at the end of the piece of wood, it kind of looks like the letter H, and that's what we were going for. With all the routering finished, there was just one more thing I had to do, and that was on the other pieces of the handle, and that's to drill the same 3 holes to match all the other pieces. To line everything up, I clamped the planks of wood together. Looking back, I probably should have just used a handheld drill, but anyway, I got all the holes in the handle, and we can move on to the first part of gluing. First, I'm going to attach the metal rods to the center wood plank. I laid down a generous layer of glue, set the rods in place, and slid the bolts through the 3 holes to make sure everything lined up. I then put glue on the other side and also added that rod. Once it was all clamped together, I left it to dry for 24 hours. A day later, I was back at it. The glue had locked the bolts in place, so I grabbed out the hammer and bashed them out, and then used my knife to clean up any of the glue that is squeezed out from underneath the metal rods. And then it was time to glue on the other 2 pieces of the handle. That's where I ran into a problem. The bolts didn't line up and they wouldn't go all the way through, at least not in all 3 holes. Luckily, it was an easy fix. I just needed to widen the holes with my drill. Doing one plank at a time, I quickly got this done. With that sorted, I spread the glue evenly, making sure to cover all of the wood and also put the bolts back in place. And clamped everything together for one last time. Then I left it to dry for another 24 hours. Even though the bolts were in the right place, I needed to remove them again for this next step. So once again, I got out the hammer. The handle was still very square shape and it was awkward to hold. So now it's time to fix it. I wanted a curve all around so it would fit comfortably in my hands. To do that, I grabbed out the grinder again, put on a sanding disc and started removing the wood. And that's exactly why I chose pine for this build. It's soft, easy to work with, and most importantly, it doesn't burn when I sand it like this. I've used other woods such as jarrah in the past and it burns when I do this. Anyway, towards the end, I also wanted to round off the sharp edge to give it a smooth finish and to make it feel like that's the end of the handle. By this point, both me and the entire backyard were completely covered in sawdust, but the shape was done. But the handle itself had one little thing left. I wanted to add a little artistic flair in between the wood and the metal rods. This extra detail is going to be a curved metal lip that sits between the handle and the rods. I started by cutting out a rectangle from the sheet of metal. Before bending it, I just need to remove a smaller rectangle from the center. To do that, I drilled a hole, and I may have accidentally bent the metal in the process, but I managed to fix it. Then I dropped the jigsaw into the hole and cut out all the metal I didn't need. I slid the piece into place just to get a preview and see how it was going to look, and I liked it. Now I just need to curve the metal. So I grabbed out an empty plant pot and wrapped the metal around it. I repeated the process on the other side, except the curve is going to go in the opposite direction, to give it an S shape. All that's left to do now is to attach it to the handle. To attach the metal pieces, I originally was going to use screws, but the drill wouldn't fit, and I couldn't even make the pilot holes, let alone screw the screws in. So instead, I decided to use nails. The only issue with this is the nails are pretty long, and they would interfere with the bolts, so I had to hammer them in on the other side. Now, you're still meant to have a pilot hole if you don't want to split the wood, but once again, I couldn't get the drill in place. However, I could drill a pilot hole into the metal, so I quickly took it to the side and did that. I started hammering the nails through, but it wasn't going in, so I figured I'd just start by getting the nail through the metal first, and that plan didn't go too well. I instead just ended up hitting my thumb. After that, I winded up making the hole slightly bigger with the drill, and this time the nail went in just right. Back of the handle, everything fit. I started hammering and eventually got it down. I just needed to add one more nail so it would be held in place securely. Now I was a little bit worried that hammering the nails in would split the wood because there's no pilot hole. But after finishing up with the second nail, I checked the wood and it was all good, and we could finally move on to adding the blade to the handle. So I grabbed out the giant disc again. First, while the metal was still blunt, I drilled a hole right in the center, the spot that I marked earlier. With that done, it was time to sharpen the edge. Since this is just used to cut pizza, it doesn't need to be razor sharp, it just has to be sharp enough to slice, well, pizza. After sharpening, I gave it a quick clean to remove all of the metal shavings, as I didn't want to get any of that in my food. And then it was time for the final assembly. I reinstalled the 3 bolts in the 3 holes and added the nuts to lock them in place. And for the very end where the blade would sit, I used one more bolt with a bunch of washers to fill in the extra space. Once everything was lined up, I tightened the bolt, gave it a little spin to make sure it was working, and then I grinded away the very end of the bolt. And just like that, I called it good. And here you go, my giant pizza cutter. This thing is awesome. Honestly, it looks like the kind of prop you'd see on the sign outside of an Italian restaurant. For scale, here's a normal pizza cutter. This thing is stupidly big, it's taller than me. I feel like a tiny man holding a normal tool. Kind of reminds me of the time I made a giant folding knife. You should watch that video. Oh, if you're wondering why the blade looks kind of white, it's because I cleaned it with soap off camera. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you hit like and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I can't do it without you. If you guys have any ideas of things I should make next, make sure you leave it in the comment. I read every one. But anyway, let's get to the fun part, and that's testing it. But first, I'm gonna make a pizza. With the pizza made, I can now cut it. I put it on the bit of wood I used for the top of my workbench and then lay it on the ground, and started cutting. This thing cut it with no issues, but because of how heavy it was, it made it a little hard to be accurate. However, the weight did help slice the pizza, and to be fair, I think I did cut it faster than normal, because well, it's a bigger blade. It was strangely satisfying to use. Just look at this cheese pool. With the pizza cut out, I could start eating it. And I realized the pizza cutter can double as a table. I don't know if it's because of this invention, but this pizza tasted better than normal. The only thing is, it's probably going to take a lot longer to clean. But who cares, I've got a giant pizza cutter. Overall, I'm very happy with how the pizza cutter looks. I'm probably going to go back and oil the handle at some point to preserve it a bit better. You can see just how well it did at cutting. What do you guys think? Should I make a giant pizza? But anyway, it's time for me to sit down and enjoy my pizza, knowing I cut mine ever so slightly faster because I've got a bigger blade than you. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what I should make next, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.